welcome to Women Read Scripture. My name is Annette Tilleman-Dick.
And I'm Christine Thackeray.
And I'm Shima Bararon-Boffman.
Shima, we're so thrilled that you're with us today, and we'd love to learn a little more about you and share that with our listeners.
Sure, yeah. Very brief story. I came from Iran when I was 7, and we quickly joined the church, which is why we ended up staying in America. And, I grew up in upstate New York, went to BYU Law School. I clerked and worked in the corporate law firm for a few years. Went back. I did a Fulbright in Malawi, doing some work in Africa. Then I went to teach at BYU Law for a few years. The last 10 years I've been teaching at the University of Utah Law School. And I'm now back at BYU helping run the Wheatley Institute. It's like a religion think tank that has been newly expanded at BYU, and kind of continuing to teach criminal law, which has been my expertise.
Wow.
So,
What a I love that you are immersed in religion and in criminal law.
Yes,
What a one,
I know.
and
what a disparity.
and Shima is expecting
People
her
are different.
5th baby,
That's right.
which is very exciting to all of us.
I'm so excited.
Shima, I had a question, which now I lost. So my grandfather, my grandmother remarried after the Holocaust, so we called him Popchi. Used to say when you forgot something, he'd say something similar. And you were a Fulbright in Malawi. That's very interesting to me because we had a number of Fulbright scholars in our family. What did you?
Yes, I
what did you
studied
focus
pretrial
on?
detention, and that ended up being my expertise. Is bail and pretrial detention, kind of that period when you're charged with a crime but not found guilty. And so I actually wrote a book about bail. It was the first book since 1970 with Cambridge. I published that in 2018, I think it was. It's called the Bail Book. So yeah, that was the result of my Fulbright.
I'm really glad I asked that question, but it's not the one I wanted, which was this, and that is, please tell us a little tiny bit about what you're doing with the Wheatley Institute.
Oh yes,
because
it's
it's very relevant
That's
to
right.
what we're doing.
Yeah, so the church has decided to work with BYU to expand what has already been a kind of standalone private institute called the Wheatley Institute. It's been there for a while, but they're trying to expand it. And so that one of the great expertise of BYU becomes research on religion and how it benefits society. And so if you remember, President Oaks recently spoke at conference about how important it is for people to go to church, and that it's a good for society, not just for individuals. And so we're going to kind of do research on that area, and I'll be supervising the faculty doing research on that, and then doing public education, just because religion is, struggling kind of in a broader American in society right now. Younger people are maybe not seeing the vision as we were. And so we're hoping to kind of invigorate people and think about more, why it's good to be part of faith and spirituality and religion, and this could benefit you. And I think it does. I mean, the research is clear. It's just giving that out there so people understand.
The research is clear, but what is never clear, because we're still living in this dynamic society, is that this very problem. Shima mentioned to me as we were speaking that only 30% of youth within our church, within other evangelical faiths, in many different areas of faith, are remaining faithful adherents at this point, according to
in the 18
statistics.
To 24 range. People are just dropping off from faith. Yeah.
And what I find valuable is that creates a bit of a crisis for faiths, and yet the response is for us to come together, for believers to come together and see what unites us. Mm-hmm. What are the things that make faith itself such a positive force in our lives? And I think that's something that you'll be exploring in great depth. I love that.
I'm very excited.
This idea of
glad that you
unity.
I figured you would agree, but yes, it's exciting to have people that are on board.
I love it.
Yes.
Well,
so true.
I'm sure that our listeners have noticed that our fearless and fantastic leader, our radiant leader, Marianna Richardson, is not with us today. And we really miss always her presence, her perspective, and her diligence in preparation. Because Marianna really every week guides us in these presentations. She is not here because Marianna, another hat that she wears is as the secretary for the interfaith forum of the G20. And the G20 is a group of the 20 most powerful economies in the world. Most of them are countries, but the European Union goes in as one unit, so that makes it a very powerful economy as well. And they get together to confront, to try to work together. Very different countries, everybody from China to US, to Russia, to Turkey, to the EU, to work on the problems that the world faces, whether these are sexual trafficking, whether they are environmental challenges, whether they are, so many different things, health, the health of the world, and of course the great economic disparity which underlies a lot of the conflict that we face. Marianna was telling me how challenging it is with these very different views to come to consensus, even on sometimes very simple things, for example, where they will meet. And this year they are meeting in India. As she explained this to me and as we studied, I felt it was really an excellent segue into studying the Corinthians. Today we will be looking at 1 Corinthians chapter 8 through chapter 13. And we are looking at a group of people who are very diverse. Corinth is an isthmus with wonderful ports that go to the east and to the west. So it attracted a lot of commerce and a lot of people and a lot of different groups. And interestingly, Paul was successful in convincing many different kinds of people to become members of this first church of Jesus Christ. But they didn't always agree. And that is where we find ourselves in Corinthians 8. Paul, the letter that we're talking about, he wrote from Ephesus. He was not there as he wrote it, but he had heard from more than one source that there was a lot of conflict in Corinth, and he wanted to respond to that. One of the first issues that he is talking to seems a little vague to us. It's about meat and what kinds of meat you can eat, and should they eat meat offered to idols, or should they not eat meat offered to idols, and how they gather together to do this. It really is interesting when you get more deeply into it. First of all, in this society in Corinth, most foods, including meat, when they were slaughtered in the general market, were offered to an idol, because that was the custom. And it was sort of, why not kill two birds with one stone? You give it to idol, and you get a little good luck, and then you sell it in the market. But there were many, of course, who came from the tradition of Israel, the Jewish tradition, where there were very strict controls over what you ate and what you didn't eat. And even today, kosher meat is careful. When it's slaughtered, it is always slaughtered with prayer and dedicated to God. Now, but they lived in this society. These were the markets. These were the people. If you went to a birthday party, if you went to a business celebration, if you went to a community celebration, they would be eating these foods. And the question was, can we eat these foods? Paul said, yes, we can. We can eat these foods because it doesn't make us better or worse what food we eat or what food we don't. But he was worried that for some amongst them, it would hurt their faith if they saw these faithful members of the church eating food that had been offered to idols. And I had a question that I wanted to ask at the outset, which was, many of them, well, let me just first say that he would say, they would say, we know that God doesn't care about this, so we don't need to do it. And what Paul asked them to do was to stretch and to understand that even if they knew that it wasn't important to God, that they think what was important to the people around them, and that they not eat if it would hurt the faith of others, and that they be more sensitive to the impact they have on the community.
And were you going to read 1 Corinthians 8:13, where he says those words?
Can you read
exactly?
it for us?
He says, "Wherefore, if meat make my brother to offend, I will eat no meat while the world standeth, lest I make my brother to offend."
Paul tells us a lot in these chapters about how much he doesn't do and doesn't ask of others because he doesn't want to offend. And why does he not want to offend? Not because he's so polite, but because he doesn't want to be a block in the way of them being able to hear and accept the gospel of Jesus Christ for the liberation that will bring to them.
Yes.
And this meat issue is one of those many issues. He says also, and he talks a lot about those who think that they know well enough. Mm-hmm. They know enough that they don't need to worry about that law, that they are close enough to God that it doesn't matter. And he warns them about becoming puffed up in those ways. He says something that I'd like to ask what you think about. He says, if any man know God, the same is known of him. What do you think he meant by that? Shima.
I had written, but if man love God, the same is known of him. Is that the same, or am I in the wrong spot?
Well, I think they're both, and love is the same.
I guess both know and love. I know, to know and love. I mean, to me, when he was saying that, if a man love God, the same is known of him. I don't know. I just felt like he was starting with this sense of humility, of like the important thing is you love God. And he also right before that says knowledge, like you said, knowledge makes us prideful, charity edifies. None of us know what we ought to know. And so kind of like just love God, and then you will know what to do, and kind of like have the Spirit. I mean, that's kind of what it meant to me. I don't know how you saw it.
And I want to hear what you were thinking.
I love that, because I was thinking very similar, that if you love God, then God knows what your motivations and intent is.
That's right.
And so often with eating meat, what is the intent? Is it because you're hungry? Or is it because, you don't care, you're kind of letting down your lines, or you're not being aware of other people?
And the impact.
So, the Lord will inspire you also, whether it's an appropriate thing or inappropriate, based on other people. I think when you love him and let him in your life.
And I felt that, he was saying, if anyone know man, God knows you, that you may say, I know that God thinks this is okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
God knows you.
Yes.
Really well. And he knows whether or not you're thinking about how what you're doing is impacting those around you, how it's hurting their faith, maybe, how it's maybe just making them wonder. That suddenly I just saw.
Well, it is funny, because when you get really clever people, they're so good at rationalizing. So they can make the perfect argument.
Absolutely.
But if the Lord really knows your intent, that argument doesn't hold water.
Right.
So.
I mean, we don't need to. It's not for us to judge, but the Lord is going to judge.
Yeah.
And Paul does boldly take upon himself the responsibility of unpacking this for these saints. He's had these letters from Chloe and her family saying, we have a lot of problems here, and they're doing all these things, and they're really causing. The other thing about eating meat with idols, because, Paul did believe that there were demons, and these things were in some ways offered to demons, and that as when we took the sacrament, we join ourselves with Christ. Mm-hmm. When you're eating these things, are you, in some metaphoric, symbolic way, joining yourself with demons? Or you may not think so. And he said, and in fact, you're right, it's just food. But if others are feeling that,
you should
just forgo.
Yeah.
So
nice.
Christine, what Paul is asking us to do is stretch.
I love
and
that.
That's what I'm going to ask you to talk to us.
And lengthen our stride.
That's
Look beyond where we are.
Lengthen
and actually that has everything to do with 1 Corinthians 9:24. And in 9:24, it's the very first time that Paul uses the analogy of a race. Mm-hmm. And so in this verse, he says that, know ye not that they which run in a race all, but one receiveth a prize? So run that ye may obtain. And it was interesting, because I was talking to my family about this, and they all had different takeaways. But I'll tell you, my takeaway was that as we run in a race, it's so easy to pace yourself with the people beside you. But if you're running to obtain, you break free of the pack, and you just think about you winning. And it's not that we're not being thoughtful, but we don't get stuck, like holding ourselves back, because we're thinking about us and the finish line, us and the Lord. And that is our focus as we run. And I loved that because remember the 4-minute mile, how it was like the 6-minute mile and then the 5.5, and it went down and down. And it was because people kind of ran in packs and they thought they could only go this fast.
Right.
And that idea of running, and we've increased our ability as people let go of what is typical or what is normal.
Oh, that's so true that we are. It's pushing our boundaries.
And so I do that, run so you may obtain. But in doing so, other people may not be happy with you getting ahead of them.
Right.
And they may feel, I think sometimes you kind of feel that negative emotion. So my question was, have you ever had that experience where you think you're doing just what you should be doing and other people kind of sideways glance at what you're doing?
That's been my whole life. That's been my whole life. I started teaching my kids at home before it was a thing. It was, in the very, very early 80s. And my wonderful friends, they're like, why on earth would you do that when we have these schools to do it, And they were sweet because they loved me and they were just like, it takes all your time. You're stressed out, sometimes from it, even though I got less stressed out over time. But it was, it really, it required me to go to the Lord and say, is this what you want me to do? So that I could feel convinced. And I had experiences where, people I loved and admired very much came down very hard on me for that particular thing. But I think and then on the other side, I went to a very secular university, and what did I do there? Join the church.
But that's where it's run that you may obtain, and each one of us kind of may run a different way, may do it a different way. And so
that's right.
And did you have an experience you wanted to share?
I'm trying to think. I guess for me, and maybe you'll get to this later, but when I was thinking about the race, it's like the gospel is one of those races where we all can win.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
And
it's
that's
like you can look at someone else and they might be looking at you, but it's like it doesn't really matter because we can all win, and maybe we're all at different places, but that's what kind of came to my mind. It's like,
and I think it's
a
more
race,
of an obstacle course.
Right. Right. It's like, and ours is different, and yours might have,
less,
3 layers of jumps, and mine might have, like things I have to throw, and there's just different things that will, and so it's like, I might look at yours, but it's not the same race as mine, so I don't really get much out of that.
That's exactly
so important to understand our races are different.
Yes.
And so we can't be judging someone else's race, but what we do want to do is throw ourselves into
into our own race.
And recognize what that is supposed to be.
And let what other people think as you do what you believe your race is, let that go, not let it change you or weigh you down.
Yeah.
I did have this great quote from President Nelson, gave a talk, a devotional to the youth. It's called You Were Born to Stand Out. And I love this. And he talked about how being a disciple of Christ may sound different, you may act different, you may dress different in the world. And he says, and if sometimes people call you weird, wear it as a badge of honor. And be happy your light
that's
is
very
bright
Paul.
in ever darkening world.
That we should be proud of the weaknesses,
So I do think sometimes people call us weird. Well, I wanted to just quickly go through the other 3 or 4 times that Paul uses the same analogy, because they kind of all go together. So in Galatians, he says, ye did run well, but who did hinder you that you obeyed not the truth? And so what was holding you back from running the race? And we talked about how sometimes other people are holding us back. But can you think of other things that weigh us down or hold us back from running the race with the way we should?
Yeah, definitely, I think our bodies, right? He talks about how much we train our bodies, and we'll talk about temptation as we move on. But I think that's a big one in this life, right? Where Satan's using our bodies against us, even though they're the gift that we have from God that can help us. But I think that's one big one.
I do. And there's things that we physically can't do. So I spent a year paralyzed. I had Guillain-Barré, and I had 7 young children. The oldest was 14 and the youngest was 2 or 3. And it was tough because you felt like there was so much you wanted to do. My heart was in the right place, but I couldn't do anything.
But Christine, what I was going to say is one of the things, though, that holds us back. There are 2 things. One, I was thinking, is self-confidence.
Right.
But it shouldn't
Love
be
that.
self-confidence. It should be confidence. We are weak. We are incapable.
Absolutely.
We can't do
Right.
it on our
Yes.
own. Our self-confidence should only be in recognizing, yes, I'm a basket case. in some way. Yes,
I need help, is what I recognize.
And the Lord,
I
I'm
want to do all this
Yeah.
stuff, and not, or maybe it's not that I want to, but I've got to do all this stuff. It has been put upon me, and I don't know how I'm going to do it. But to have the confidence that the Lord will see us through. He
Right.
wants us to win our race.
Absolutely.
We aren't racing against one another. We are racing to stretch ourselves
Yep.
and to have that profound recognition, to realize where he's come and helped us, and to know he's going, he will be there. The Lord will be there
That's such a
for
neat
us.
thing that Paul does, because to think of like how learned he is and wise and so smart. I mean, some scholars now say he's a genius, like he was, certified genius. And yet so much throughout all of these readings that we have, that especially this, 8 to 13, he just talks about how, I'm nothing without God. I'm just kind of lesser than everyone. Like he just is very humble. And like you said, recognizing our place in things, like we're basket cases, all of us. We need Jesus Christ. We need God,
And we
end of
can
story.
do it. We can do it.
And with them, we
if
can do
we
it,
can imagine, when
know?
people say these things, if you can imagine it, you can do it. You're like, wait, I'm not going to imagine a lot of things.
Yeah.
But if that imagination is something that has been given to you as inspiration from the Spirit, which it often is. My father, who was not a faithful man on this when you looked at it, but he was a very faithful man in other ways. I know that he received a lot of inspiration from the Lord, and he had the confidence to move forward and do those things, and it wasn't easy.
I was going to say that I do believe that we struggle with our own abilities and our own limitations and our trials, but I think we also sometimes are running with a backpack full of rocks that we can let go.
Oh,
And
you're
that.
here,
I
here,
love that.
Debating with what you can let go versus what you don't. Well, I
Yes.
even think sometimes it's maybe being on the library board, or and there's sometimes you're supposed to be in those moments, and there's sometimes the Lord's like, you don't need to
Let
be
it
doing that,
go.
because your focus should be here.
Yep.
And so I think that's where also we decide which we have to do that. But let's go quick, because I know we have so much more to go through. I wanted to finish those last two times he
Yes.
taught. The next one he used was in, the beautiful one in Hebrews, where he said, let us run with patience the race that is set before us. It's at the very beginning of Hebrews 12, my very favorite chapter, which is probably everyone's, looking unto Christ, the author and finisher of our faith.
Oh, I love
And so I love that, run with patience. And I think, how do we run with patience?
So good.
How do we run with patience? That's,
Right.
I mean,
Do you think of enduring to the end? That's what it reminds me of.
and enduring to the end of each segment too that we're given, because there are moments when I just don't know if I'll be able to finish this. But say, this has been given to me. I need to run and I need to finish.
Right.
On whether it's a child that we're trying to bring up well, whether it's a paper we're trying to write, whether it is a calling we have in church, whether it is just being a good neighbor.
I agree.
And I love those two. And I do want to say there is a beautiful segment in the movie. And the reason I want to mention it is because I've talked to so many people who haven't seen this movie. And it's called Chariots of Fire. Have you?
Oh, yes.
Yep.
It is a truly magnificent movie. And Eric Liddell, it is about runners.
Yes.
So if you're interested in sports, but it is also about the way the Spirit works in the lives of people. And Eric Liddell, who is very faithful, devout Christian, is also a brilliant runner. And he talks about running this race.
Right.
And so I really encourage our viewers, if they haven't seen it.
Yes.
And
I tried
even
to
if
get
you
my children
had
to watch it
but
without success, but maybe you'll have more luck.
It's kind of slow beginning. But
I
then once you
know.
get
We
into
tried, and they were like,
'cause
"No,
it's one
Mom."
that takes a little bit to get into.
It takes a little bit.
But
But
now,
it's so good. It's
Talking
so good.
about running, we are
Yes.
now going to, Shima's going to talk to us about First Corinthians chapter 10.
Yes.
Verses
temptation.
yes, and in there we learn about the temptations we face and the way that we can the Lord gives us to get away if we choose to.
Yes, I love this part. And I think you gave some perfect background about Paul, but I want to mention a couple other things about him. So I think it's important that he, understanding where his background is, because he has this humility, but it comes from this place because of what he's done. And so, he's a Pharisee of Pharisees. His family is just very Jewish, and he's actually working really hard to fight against the church. He ends up
very educated,
yes,
probably.
Very
and
educated.
Probably,
right.
Paul, some of the people that Marianna has thought were wealthy, I don't think they were. Fishermen, not so wealthy usually.
Yeah.
They didn't have fishing businesses in the same way there.
But Paul was.
Paul
Yes,
was.
successful.
He came from Tarsus.
That's
he
right.
was born to parents who were already Roman citizens.
And it was a university town.
That's right, exactly. And so he's this learned man fighting against the church. He ends up being in the group that condemns Stephen to death. He's one of the deacons, that's called, as you know. And so he has this, not guilt at the time, but later, as he's on the road, as we know, famously to Damascus, and Christ's voice comes to him and says, Paul, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? Then he, is blind and then converts. And I think because of his background of feeling this guilt that he's harmed the church so much, I do feel like he's more sensitive to this a topic of temptations and thinking about sin, because he realizes he's flawed and he's made mistakes, and without Christ he's not whole. And I think it's neat because I think people sometimes that become missionaries, you think of Alma the Younger, Paul, that have had this kind of questionable past where they have done harm to the church, are more able to talk about temptation and sin in a real compelling way and about repentance and forgiveness. So that's why I love, his background, and just thinking about that is so helpful. And then he tells us, famously in Corinthians, that God will not suffer you to be tempted above that ye are able. And he says, basically the Lord will help us escape temptation, and he knows what we're able to bear, and that, he won't give us any more than we can manage. And Neil A. Maxwell has a great quote on this. He says, just as no temptations come to us that we can't escape, God won't give us any more trials than we're able to take. And I think it comes together, temptations and trials. Did you have a thought
I
on
was
that?
going to say that I always struggled with that, because sometimes you felt like as a teenager that temptations were too much.
Yes.
And it is interesting that it says you will not be tempted above what you were able, but
Yes, I was going to
with
say,
the temptation comes the escape.
That's
And so
so
with
good.
every temptation there comes an escape, but if you decide not to take it,
Right.
and sometimes that temptation, the escape comes before
Yes.
you've actually stepped too far. Like
Yep.
when you know you shouldn't go to a party,
That's
and the
right.
Lord's telling you, and if you step into that party,
Yes.
it may be more than you can do.
Totally.
So you have to take the escape. But I loved you going through Paul's background.
Yes.
Because it made me so touched to think of his escape.
Yes.
Which is, he went so far down the path, but then the Lord
Yes.
allowed him an escape that would give him the
Yep.
ability to truly be healed
Absolutely.
from the worst of choices.
Absolutely.
And so I just think, wow, to have the escape be
Right.
Christ coming to you would be
Yes. Can you
huge.
imagine?
But a couple of things.
love
First
that.
of all, the immediate thing that you said, Christine, Paul's desire was to serve the Lord.
It was.
Right.
And
that's
so,
why he
and
made-
that
That's
is why,
right.
that's the
That was
Lord
his
comes to
driving
unlikely
force.
people.
Yes.
It's a question of as it says, if you know God, he knows you. God knows people, and he knows who will be able to do the work he needs them to do.
Yes.
Why would he come to Joseph Smith of all the crazy choices in the
Yes.
world? Because he knew he would be able to do the work. Why did he come to Paul, who was on his way to gather up Christians and
Right.
bring
Bring
them
them to
for
Jerusalem.
persecution and help put them up before the thing? Why would he be the one that Jesus,
Right.
in a most dramatic way, appears to
Yes.
after he died? It is because he knew Paul, and he knew what Paul
I love
could
it.
do.
I think about Jonah and how Jonah hated
Yes.
the Assyrians and
Yes.
didn't want to go on a mission.
Oh.
But it was his hatred that turned them around.
Yeah.
That's because he must have been so passionate.
And the Lord,
Right.
why would he be? He
It's
was so
true.
determined to get
It's
away.
so
picking
true.
the right person for the right calling.
And there was one other thing that you said, Christine, that I wanted to comment on in this, but you know what? Oh, I know. It's that Elder Holland, you can see I'm intuitive rather than organized, but Elder Holland spoke beautifully about this passage. And he did say something. He said, God will provide an escape, either before or after. Sometimes we don't recognize it.
Right.
And sometimes we don't want it.
Right.
That's the
yes. And
I
that's what
thought-
I was going to talk about.
Oh,
yeah.
go ahead. You had that
No,
one.
it was just the same thing. It's like as a teen at a party, or even for adults, it's like, we can choose to be on a higher path, or we can choose not to be and allow ourselves these temptations.
Right.
And I think for women, since we're talking to a lot of women, sometimes gossip can be something. So if you think about situations where you end up gossiping, right? Like it's hard to, once you're in there, to not do it. And so just take yourself out of it. It's like the teens, you tell them, like, just don't go to the party with alcohol, right? Easy as that.
Right.
Don't go to the lunch where everyone's going to be gossiping. Do you know what I mean? Just
Right.
things like
And
that.
Listen to the Spirit.
Listen to the
because it
Spirit.
will guide you, and it will
'Cause-
give you that escape.
Because I feel like that part that you highlighted, the but part, and that verse where it's like, yes, God won't give you more temptations, but He's going to provide you an escape.
Yes,
And
and
it's
if you
probably,
don't take it, it will be more.
that's right. It's going to be too hard to handle if you don't take the escape.
Right.
And so easier to get out of the escape beforehand than to put yourself in that situation when whatever it is, if it's gossip, if it's murmuring about the
Right.
Lord's anointed, if it's whatever your temptation is,
Wow.
it's computers or, whatever.
I love that.
Yeah,
Those
go
are
ahead.
real.
Yeah.
Because, each one is.
And I think that, for example, though, if we find ourselves in a situation when that thought comes to us,
Yeah.
this is gossip,
Yeah.
to escape. That
Escape.
thought is
Right.
the key.
Right.
Where,
Maybe our
where we
escape,
turn the conversation in another direction,
Yeah.
we say something nice, and we find something.
That's right.
And you can even be
ch-
totally inappropriate. Just say, I think this is gossip. Can we
Yeah.
change? Just call a spade a spade.
There was a great story of a woman in our ward who's teaching really highlighted this one woman where there was gossip that came up, and they said that she even just said that she turned silent and said, "This is gossip. I'm not going to talk about this," and just made everyone feel. I mean, this is like ministering.
But that's like
everybody
Paul. You
and
make
it's like,
Paul made them feel quite
you could-
uncomfortable.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
makes you
that was
uncomfortable.
Paul.
But whatever your escape might be, if it's leaving, if it's saying something nice, if it's just calling it out for what it is.
And
But
now, as Elder Holland said, some of us don't want it, but the Lord has provided for that, and
Yeah,
He's provided for
absolutely.
that through the atonement, and for us, we have an opportunity to review every week how we need to escape from patterns or behaviors that are not in harmony with the highest in us.
Yes.
And that
love that.
opportunity comes all the time, but certainly at the table where we take the sacrament.
Absolutely.
And which we do in unity. And Paul there were a lot of challenges there among the Corinthians about how they were handling sacrament. And some of it was custom. It had become a custom to have the sacrament, when they met to have the Lord's Supper, that it would be almost a picnic.
Right.
And people would bring food, and the wealthier members of the ward would come earlier because they weren't having to work from morning till night. And they'd bring the best things, and they'd eat, and they'd talk, and they'd have a great time. And by the time the poor members of the ward came, it was all gone. And except they would bring their meager offerings. And Paul really says, let's not do this anymore. It is promoting cliquiness. And I think that we know how appropriate the concern of cliquiness is to our wonderful Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It is, unfortunately, a really serious problem. And I mean, I don't want to say it is, I say that, but I feel like the church is a wonderful and welcoming place. But I think that sometimes just in the very wonderful, welcoming social joy, without meaning to, people break into groups. And those groups, which is what happened in Corinth,
Sure.
make others feel left out and not wanted or not cared for. And there can be so many different reasons that happens. It can be that they are enjoying their things and the others come late and they just aren't there. And the people who were there first don't think about the fact that these people are coming later because they're working really hard to provide for their families. Or it can be that people are jealous and they don't want to let people into their groups. I've heard, I don't know what you have heard, but a lot in singles wards. I've never been in a singles ward because
I spent years in a singles
and
ward.
I have had lots of conversations with people who felt, in fact, very sadly, we had a young man who was baptized by missionaries in our family ward, and they took him to the singles ward, and he went a few times. He came back. He said, I felt so unwelcome. And it just hard.
Yeah.
Well, usually in a singles ward, they all feel unwelcome because they're not very
I
social.
know.
They're used to being on their computers. But I think even in Relief Societies, our ward has married students, and then it has one neighborhood, and then it has an area that's kind of a combination of poor and huge houses that are on this old block.
Oh, wow.
And so you have these three very mixed group of people. And it's hard sometimes because people naturally we're all worshiping Christ, and you think you want people that are the same as you.
Right.
But we have such different backgrounds, such
Absolutely.
different interests. And that's what Corinth was dealing with, and how we find that unity in Christ and are willing to expand our ability to love and reach beyond people that don't have other similarities to us. I think is truly a reflection of whether we're Christ-like.
And it's what Paul over and over again is asking us to have more situational awareness of who is around us and how what we're doing actually is impacting them. And he's saying you may not be doing anything wrong,
Right.
not at all,
Love that.
but you do need to sharpen your awareness of how what you're doing may be impacting others. I thought it was beautiful when he describes how the sacrament should be taken. He basically tells them that he says, if you're hungry, eat at home. He says in the last verse, he says, if any man hunger, let him eat at home. And that's how
This
he
is
says.
not for
this
eating.
Is,
This
yeah,
is
this
about
is not for coming
dinner
together.
party.
Come
eat
to
at
home.
church.
But he describes the way that the sacrament should be giving. He says, for I have received of the Lord that which also I delivered unto you, that the Lord Jesus Christ, the same night in which he was betrayed, took bread, and when he had given thanks, he brake it and said, take, eat. This is my body, which is broken for you, and do it in remembrance of me. After the same manner also he took the cup when he had supped, saying, this cup is the New Testament in my blood. This do we as oft as ye drink it in remembrance. This do ye as oft as ye drink it in remembrance of me. For as often as ye eat this bread and drink this cup, ye do show the Lord's death till he come.
Nice. Where is that
This
verse?
is in it is in chapter 11, verses 23 through 26. And
It's beautiful.
it is so, and what is, of course, to us, it's beautiful because it's exactly what we do every Sunday in this simple way.
Right.
We have I've been to sacraments which are so beautiful in other churches. There's a lot of pomp and circumstance. And it is an awesome event that we're doing. It is awesome. In the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, it is usually a very simple event that it is administered by 11 and 12-year-old boys, sometimes others if they aren't available.
That's right.
And we have very simple bread and very simple water. And it is simple to the max. I remember when I was looking at before I had joined the church, I was looking for truth in many, and I went to a lot of different churches, and some have had the most gorgeous loaves of homemade bread, and it was really wonderful experience. And I don't think the truth is that the manner in which it is done is not important,
Right.
but the spirit of it.
That's right.
That we not lose the power of it in our lives to help us escape temptation, to help keep us committed to the covenants we've made at baptism, to be part of the Lord's family, to take his name upon us and to act in a way that is in harmony with what that would mean. And that is what Paul is asking us, I think, over and over again, to act in harmony with this name that you've taken upon yourself.
I love that. And to simplify and see what's really important. I love that.
And I didn't talk about yet but it's important about how he explains that we are different. So, we had this problem with these different groups. We are different. We are different like the parts of a body. It is such, do you see where that scripture is? So we could read it because it is so wonderful. Well, but he knows that we are each a different part of the body, but the body cannot function well without every single part. So what we really are called to do as we run that race is to do you to the best you can. And that is what is going to make this body of Christ. And what I love when he says that the less honorable parts of the body we tend to cover, but he said by that we honor them. I love that, he says that, by covering them, we bring more honor to those parts of the body, and that they are so important as well,
So it starts in chapter 12.
Yeah.
Yes.
And if you look at verse 13 through 27, but and I love when it says, if the foot shall say, because I am not the hand, I am not of the body, is it therefore not of the body? And so it's like sometimes you are just a foot and not a hand. And the hand can do everything and the foot just stands there.
Or it moves forward, but the foot is important, and even one toe on that foot missing would be missed.
Right.
Yes.
And I loved in our Come Follow Me manual for this lesson on the Corinthians, it said, consider having, they have suggestions for children and families. Consider asking your children to draw a person that's all noses or all ears or all feet.
Yeah.
And I love that idea because it is so illustrative. And Paul says the same thing. He says, we can't be all feet, and we can't all be hands, and we can't all be heads.
And we all together constitute the body of Christ is how it ends, right? In 27.
Right.
Now ye are the body of Christ, and members in particular. I mean, we all are different, and I think too, you think of if we're all ears, it sounds funny to have your kids draw it, but when you think about divisions in our day, right? Not just cliques, but even just political, racial, kind of social divisions. People thinking, well, I can't talk to people that voted for X or Y. And thinking, it's like, I only want to talk to ears, not the feet. It's like, but we all are necessary, right? We all the parts are needed. And in this society, like in Corinth, we need to figure out how to all appreciate our differences rather than wanting to only be with feet.
Exactly. Paul says it.
That's true.
And he says, and if they were all one member, where would the body be? Where would we just
need each other.
It's really funny. I urge people to read these scriptures. And I want to say that if you find this beautiful King James English challenging, find other translations and of the scriptures to read with it, because you will read them, they will enhance it for you, and you will go back and you will love the King James even more. You'll appreciate it because the King James version was written by both scholars and poets, and it really does capture the poetry oftentimes of the original in ways that translations that are a little easier to understand do not necessarily capture the poetry.
And I think the key is comparing. Because some of them actually, their translation has nothing to do. When I was teaching seminary, we went and we got like 20 different versions. And we read a handful of scriptures, actually from Paul, that had all the different versions. And some of them weren't even close or didn't even point on the same
sometimes you have to read the whole thing, because they can give you a sense of it. And I personally found this Jewish New Testament, which I love because it speaks to me.
Yeah.
And it shows whenever Paul is using quotes from the Tanakh, which is the Torah and the Nevi'im, the Ketuvim, and it tells you, and all of so it puts it in a different way, and it's very enjoyable. But it doesn't mean that I don't adore this.
I know when I was in England on my mission, I found a commentary from John Brown. John Brown had a little Indian, and it had his commentary of the scriptures beside it. And it was so beautiful and meaty. I just loved it, and it was his experience. So I know that looking for those other sources, as long as we stay grounded in the scriptures, is beautiful to do.
I want Shima, and as we take the sacrament, of course, we're brought together as one body in Christ with all these different parts that we hope we will seek out and to understand the value of each part. He also talks about the different spiritual gifts and how important they are, and that we don't necessarily all have one or the other, but that they are. And Shima, were you going to share that with us, or am I?
I was, but did you want to talk about the? The veil. I thought that was a really cool point that you were going to make really quick.
So
he also talks, yes.
Actually, it was when they were talking about meeting together, and in 11, chapter 4 through 15, it talks about how women have to cover their heads during the meeting. So when they come in, they keep their heads covered. And it is interesting to me because I went and I was interested in the veil, and we have our heads covered or wear a veil during the temple, but we don't do it during church.
Right.
But they did it during church because they didn't have those further ordinances at that time. But I looked into the veil and was looking at bridal magazines about you should never go for a source there. But it was interesting because what they all said, like all the bride magazines talked about the veil being a pagan tradition. And you're like, what? The veil starts way back with Moses.
Right.
It actually goes before Moses. So to Rebecca. So it was just interesting to me because as you're reading it, you're going, no.
Well, they lived.
The veil is.
Well, they were living
actually,
together. You know, I mean, they probably.
I know,
share
but they're talking about
traditions.
Rome, and Rome is way past these other traditions. So that was way. If you're using the Roman that the veil was used to protect you from evil spirits, this is way preceding that. And weddings are usually Christian or spiritual events. So you would think that it has to do with this veil. So we're going to talk about the veil just quickly. And I know our time is short, but in the biggest veil, and we'll just start with, as the law of Moses was given, and they set up the tabernacle, the veil was a huge piece of the tabernacle. So I know you're so Jewish focused and tabernacle focused. Do you want to tell us about the tabernacle and the veil?
Well, all I say is that is very important. There's a veil before the Torah, and it's a very important thing. And of course, we know that, I mean, that was something that all Christians know, that when Jesus was crucified, they say that the veil was rent in front of the Torah.
Well,
that's a part of the protection and the honor of.
But the veil was not like what we do now, where we can go through the veil. Nobody ever went through the veil. So there was the holy place, which was the place where they would have the menorah and the shewbread, and that would be changed out by priests. But only on the Day of Atonement, only the high priest of the whole church that one day of the year could go behind to the mercy seat and to sit and pray for Israel. And so it was just that one day, and no one else ever went behind the veil. So it wasn't like it is today. And you're absolutely right that when Christ was crucified, the veil was rent from the top to the bottom, from the heaven down. And when the veil was rent, the difference in the symbolic change was that now we have access through Christ, who is the veil, to that holy place, to the Lord himself when we pray. And when we go to the temple, we actually have the ability to cross that veil now, whereas they didn't before with the old law. All things are made new through Christ.
I love this understanding of the veil as a
a deeply religious honor.
You were saying, Shima, that in other faiths also.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the kind of the truth of the veil, like truth, capital T. But there are other cultures where you see this same remnant where men and women cover their heads, women with either a veil or a hat, and men, and with the Jewish culture, of course, the yarmulke, it's like the highest point of your head should be covered as reverence to God.
Right.
And so it's, and because the veil represents Jesus Christ, we are, having a piece of it. And obviously, we have our garments to represent that. But that is the whole thing. It's our reverence to God. It's our humility.
Absolutely.
It's understanding that Christ is our intercessor with the Father. I mean,
And the temple veil protected that which was sacred, the Father, from that which was profane.
That's right.
as women,
Yes.
that veil is to protect that which
That's
is
right.
sacred, which
Yep.
is why when we get married,
Well, you think of our body as a temple, and putting a cover on it,
and
you
the
know.
sacredness of our
Right.
ability to create life.
Absolutely.
And that's why only our husband is like
Right.
the high priest
Right.
that lifts the veil
Right.
as the veil was wet. And so that is the tradition. If you're getting married,
Yes, right.
the tradition is that we are keeping sacred our womanhood
Well, and the
the
treasure
gifts
that-
of our womanhood and the treasure. And we carry that in the temple.
Mm-hmm.
So we honor and revere womanhood. So the thing I did want to say is in the Assyrian Empire, only women of honor could wear a veil. So if you were married and a free woman, you could wear a veil. If you weren't, if you were a harlot or a slave and you wore a veil, you were punished within inches of your life. And so it is a point of honor. And I think so often people misrepresent
Interesting, yeah.
these verses. And I want you just to look at 1 Corinthians 11:10. And it says, "For this cause ought the women to have power on her head because of the angel."
Yes.
That the veil
So
is a
good.
sign of power.
Right.
It's a sign of the power of womanhood.
That's
I love that.
It's the power of God.
I love
No,
transition.
but it really is. It is a power.
And because of the angels. And
Yeah.
it's because we bring those angels
Right.
to the earth.
Yes.
I really think that he understands that. And sometimes you get lost in those other verses. And you're like, that is the verse to
That's
get
the
lost in.
key, right?
So
Yes, I love that.
We
I
know that
love
the
that.
veil represents Jesus Christ.
I love this idea, Christine, that as we're reading it, we can get lost in it, but we need to leave ourselves open to have the right verses sort of distill on
Right.
our consciousness because
Absolutely.
because these were written for a certain time in a certain place and issues that maybe aren't exactly relevant except the larger issues are. And
Right.
and this next chapters 12 and 13, which Shima is going to
good,
lead us
yeah.
in.
It's beautiful.
Yes.
So
I
beautiful.
love it.
I know this is a highlight for me of these verses. Just it talks about spiritual gifts and how, focuses a lot on faith, hope, and especially charity. But I love his description of faith. It made me think of it a little differently because he talks about faith being a gift of God, right? Faith is a gift we receive from God. And some of the synonyms, others have said that you could describe with faith are trust or confidence or reliance. And I was thinking about that, and it's, do we trust the Lord? That's what it means to have faith. Do we trust him? And you think about how much trust you have. You get on an airplane and you kind of like trust the pilot and the plan of the flight plan, and you get in a Uber and you trust them to drive you in a foreign city where you don't know where you're going. And how much do we trust the Lord in guiding our lives? And I think sometimes we're less trusting of God and having faith that the trials he gives us are the ones that we need, that the challenges that we have, that we'll be able to overcome them. And I just think that trust is such a beautiful concept to think of. That's a gift that God can give us. We can pray for that faith and he will give us that gift of faith.
And I think especially if you don't have it,
Yes.
sometimes we play the blame game.
Yes.
Where we're like, why don't I trust the Lord?
Yes.
Why aren't I willing to take this step into the dark?
Yeah.
Whereas we say, please give me the strength so that I can
Yes.
trust. And that prayer can be answered. And
Right.
that's the miracle.
It is.
So I know I was just going to say when I
Yeah.
was debating whether to have my fifth child, I was so overwhelmed.
Right.
And it was interesting because I kind of knew I should and didn't want to, and went to the temple, and I was talking to a friend at the temple, and I remember turning to her, and I was crying and crying for no reason, and she said, "What are you crying about?" And I said, "I have to have another baby." But that faith came to me through the Lord,
Right.
because my faith was lacking. So that
Absolutely.
it's a gift of the Spirit.
Yes.
Gives us hope when we're
gift.
lacking faith, because sometimes through exhaustion or insanity, we do lack
Yes.
faith.
I know we do.
And that's okay.
And that's where like the prayer. So it's, just to recognize it's a gift and it's not something that we have or don't have. I think sometimes we think, faith, some people are faithful and others aren't. No, it's like we can all get that
Yes,
strength and
and we
that
can be
faith
given
and
that
that
gift.
mercy and,
we talk, Paul talks about these different gifts of healing, of tongues. He's very big on, only tongues can be great for you, but only in public if you have a good interpreter to tell people what and other things. But in chapter 13, which Shima, you were going to lead us in that conversation.
Yes.
He clarifies that all of these gifts are wonderful, but it is so important that we understand the gift of charity, which is the pure love of Christ. I love that definition in our dictionary. It is charity, is oftentimes has come to be thought of as things you give away to others. You give them money, you give them that. And what I love it says in the Bible dictionary is that charity can provoke you to do those acts. But that is not what charity means, because it means the pure love of Christ.
I love that.
And if you could tell us a little bit about...
So, that's in Corinthians 13, 1-8, where he talks about charity is the greatest gift. Faith is great, hope is great. But I think it's neat where, just to translate what he's talking about, he uses an analogy from those days that don't really make sense to us, but just to translate, he says, though I speak with the tongue of men and of angels, I have not charity, and have not charity, I am become as sounding brass or a tinkling cymbal. And so what that is sounding brass was this bronze echoing vase that was had this amplifier in theaters. It was super annoying and loud. And then tinkling was to wail loudly. It was kind of a shrill voice. Basically, it's if you do these great things, but you don't have charity and you don't have the love of Christ, it's just noise. It's all it is, unpleasant sound. And so it's really neat to think of that's the key. And the thing I love about thinking about charity is it's not like these other gifts where everyone can see it. And he talks a lot about this, don't you want to appear like a righteous woman or a righteous man? It's no, that's not the point, right? Charity is this love of Christ. It's all in here. And no one knows it besides you and God if you have charity. And I think that's what's beautiful about that's the greatest gift. It's not prophesying. It's not speaking in tongues. It's not being a great praying beautifully or whatever.
Or
all
giving
these other
everything you have.
Giving everything you have, that everyone can see.
Yes.
It's this pure love of Christ that comes from within. And I think that's so, of course, that's what Christ would, want us to have, is this love, and have it. No one can really tell if you have it except for you, and we can all just work on it within ourselves. I think that's beautiful.
And I love the way that
I was going to say, probably the same idea that so many of the attributes of charity, nobody can see. Like being long-suffering.
Right.
That's right. That's exactly what I was going to say.
And he even says, if everyone knows what you're doing, that's not the point.
Nobody ever sees you biting your tongue or just suffering.
That's right.
Not,
because no one can hear about it.
Envying not.
Envying not. But no,
that's right.
Charity
all silent.
suffereth long.
The silent suffering and the silent loving. And
charity envieth not. Charity vaunteth not itself, is not puffed up. These are invisible.
And if you're not puffed up, people don't know how awesome you are.
I know.
Right? And somebody was saying, I
charity.
read something that Paul is talking about not, but then he tells them, I have this attribute in that. I was born in Rome, and but he was saying it because I do have all of these things.
Yes,
but I have made them of none effect in my life to serve you and to try to share the
I love
gospel.
that. He says we must use our gifts, do all to the glory of God, right? If you're acting in pure charity, everything's to glorify God. It's not to glorify you as a person. And that's where the challenge of human nature is,
well,
right?
The ones that were getting me was the next line where it's thinketh no evil. So
yes.
You're not even thinking. And then rejoiceth not in iniquity, but rejoiceth in truth. Okay, sometimes when someone who's really naughty does something and gets it, you're just like, yes. And that is rejoicing.
It's hard
in
not
Just
to.
stop it, Christine.
But when they get it, you mean.
Yeah, and that's not appropriate.
But the thing
That's
is
not charity.
And it isn't, it's so good to think about, to apply. It's really a wonderful thing. I had my children memorize this when they, for our homeschooling, that was one of the things that they memorized this particular chapter, because
the best.
I felt, and I have enough children that I don't think I had all of them do it, because I asked one of my younger daughters, I said, I remember when we all memorized this, because the others do. No. I thought, maybe
I missed one.
Maybe it's when you have a lot of kids, sometimes you have to, but go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think it's one of those, this is kind of what we want to work on for our lives, right? If we just can can work on this little by little. And I don't know if you've read Angela Duckworth's book called Grit. She talks about how to gain grit. Yeah, it's amazing. And
I need more grit.
I know. Well, we all do. But she talks about how to gain it. And one of the things she says is like, you spend 10,000 hours, you break it up into small pieces, and you kind of work at that thing. And this is to be great at running or being. Right. But I mean, think about like if our goal is to have the pure life of Christ, which is really like our number one goal, to be like Christ.
That's right.
It's like, can we break it down? Like today, like this week, can I be more long suffering? Next week, can I be more patient? Next week, you know what I mean? Like, could we break it down into small things and work on because you think of our lives in progression, like if we're working on anything, this should be it, I think.
This is it. This is the document.
Right.
Chapter 13, 1 Corinthians, everyone,
right.
Copy it, put it up, read it every day.
Have your kids memorize it. I love that.
And you know, we discipline ourselves in our relationships and in our thoughts because we have to map them onto these qualities.
Right.
Are we or are we not manifesting these qualities? Once in a while, as a parent, you do have to reprimand your children. You do have to hold them to a standard. But are we doing it, as I love what Paul does this a lot. He reprimands and then he shows forth more love.
Right.
You know, I think that we do have this template from DNC. I think it's 121, isn't it? Where it says sometimes you have to reprimand people with sharpness and then show forth more love to make sure that they know that you love them and esteem them.
Absolutely.
And I think that for me, this is such an important document to help me stay on the right path.
Absolutely. And I love that end where it says charity never faileth. Where there be prophecies, they shall fail, in tongues. And I think it's so funny because when I served on my mission, that was the biggest shocker, was you felt like if you totally convinced someone, if you showed them clearly through the scriptures, if they believed you the church was true, why wouldn't they change their lives? Why wouldn't they move forward?
Right.
And they didn't. But so often it's when they feel that love touch their heart.
That's right.
Then even if they're not willing to change, you still have a connection. You still have an openness that allows you to make a difference.
I think that is what these chapters have been about, is Paul's desire to model and teach by not only example, but in what he says, how we can show greater love.
Yes.
And how we can appreciate the love that is part of every single person who comes together with us, whether it is gathering together in the church or in other places, to be able to reach out and recognize the gifts and the love of each daughter and son of our Heavenly Father who is a part of our life. I am so grateful that we have had a chance to explore these things together. And I love these last two verses. He said, "For now we see through a glass darkly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then I shall know even as I am known. And now abideth faith, hope, and charity, these three. But the greatest of these is charity." So thank you so much for being here to share these with us.
Thank you.
Thanks.